Chains rattled in the dead of night as fire lit up the sky. The grand plantation house, once a place of feasts, power, and cruelty, was now engulfed in flames. Screams echoed, glass shattered, and the overseer's body dangled lifelessly from a tree. On Christmas Eve, 1836, one slave's rage turned celebration into slaughter. This was no accident, no random blaze. It was revenge, carved in fire and blood. But the true horror lay in what came next. The year was 1836, and the Louisiana winter carried with it both chill and festivity. For the wealthy planters, it was the season of feasts, church gatherings, and Christmas celebrations. But for the enslaved, it was simply another season of chains. Among the many plantations along the Mississippi River, the Bellamy plantation stood like a monument to wealth. Acres upon acres of cotton fields stretched to the horizon, their white bowls gleaming like snow under the southern sun. The master of this empire was Charles Bellamy, a man whose fortune was measured not only in acres, but in the number of lives he owned. Charles Bellamy fancied himself a gentleman. He wore fine coats imported from New Orleans, smoked Cuban cigars, and dined on silver plates. But beneath his polished manners was a cold heart, one that saw human beings as mere tools to grow his wealth. His wife, Eleanor Bellamy, was no softer. Dressed always in lace and pearls, she carried herself with an air of superiority so heavy it suffocated everyone around her. Her sharp voice echoed through the halls of the plantation house, scolding, demanding, commanding. But the true hand of terror on Bellamy Plantation belonged to the overseer, Thomas Granger. He was a man built of raw brutality, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from cruelty. His boots struck the earth like war drums, and the whip he carried sang daily across the backs of slaves. Granger did not discipline to maintain order, he punished to feed his own hunger for power. And it was under these three figures, master, mistress, and overseer, that hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children lived out their days. Among them was a man named Josiah. Josiah was born on Bellamy soil in 1810. His first cry was not met with joy, but with indifference. For the Bellamys, he was not a child, he was property. His mother, Hannah, cradled him with all the love she could, whispering lullabies into his ears even as she wept in fear that one day he would be sold. He grew up in the quarters, a cluster of wooden shacks huddled on the edge of the fields. The air there was heavy with smoke from cooking fires, the cries of children, the groans of exhaustion. Even as a boy, Josiah learned that laughter was dangerous, that silence was safer. He learned that eyes should always be lowered when the overseer passed, that tears must be swallowed before they could be seen. At 7 years old, Josiah was already carrying water buckets larger than his own arms. At 10, he picked cotton until his fingers bled. By 12, he had scars across his back from the overseer's whip, scars that never faded, only deepened as the years dragged on. But Josiah endured. He grew tall, broad-shouldered, with arms hardened by endless labor. His silence became his shield. While others cursed under their breath or cried out in despair, Josiah spoke little. He watched. He listened. He remembered. Life on the plantation was divided between the house, the fields, and the quarters. The house was a place of grandeur, high ceilings, polished wood floors, chandeliers lit with candles that seemed to glow endlessly. It was there that the master and mistress hosted lavish dinners, where guests laughed loudly over wine, while the enslaved served silently in the shadows. The fields, by contrast, were a world of torment. From dawn until dusk, men and women bent under the burning sun, plucking cotton, dragging sacks that weighed more with every step. Overseer Granger patrolled constantly, whip in hand, his shadow stretching long across the rows. A cough, a stumble, even the slowing of pace could bring punishment swift and merciless. And then there were the quarters. Cramped cabins with dirt floors and leaking roofs, they were filled each night with weary bodies. Yet despite the suffering, the quarters held whispers of resilience. Here, mothers hummed old African lullabies to their children. Here, elders told stories of ancestors who once walked free. Here, slaves prayed in secret, whispering for deliverance. Josiah listened to those prayers, and though he said nothing, a question burned quietly in his heart. When will deliverance come? Every Christmas, Master Bellamy hosted what he called the grandest feast in the parish. Guests traveled from miles around to drink, dine, and boast of their fortunes. The house glittered with pine garlands and candlelight, tables bent under roasted turkeys, hams glazed with honey, and pies sweetened with molasses. Music filled the air, fiddles and flutes playing while dancers twirled in silk gowns. The slaves were forced to labor harder in these days, cooking, serving, cleaning, hauling barrels of wine. For their efforts, some were given scraps of leftover meat, maybe even a sip of watered cider. To the masters, this was generosity. To Josiah, it was mockery. Each Christmas Eve, as he carried trays through the glowing rooms, Josiah's eyes scanned the house. He saw the barrels of whiskey rolled into corners, the candles flickering near dry garlands, the drunken laughter that drowned out caution. And each time, he thought, one spark could turn this feast into ashes. For years, Josiah endured silently. He bore the whippings, the hunger, the endless toil. He buried friends who collapsed in the fields. He comforted children torn from their mother's arms. But in the winter of 1836, his silence cracked. The reason was his younger brother, Samuel. Samuel was 19, quick to laugh, quick to sing, carrying a spark Josiah never allowed himself to show. He was lean but strong, his spirit unbroken despite the chains. To Josiah, Samuel was more than a brother. He was proof that joy could still survive in bondage. But Overseer Granger despised Samuel's spirit. One cold morning, as frost clung to the cotton, Samuel stumbled. His sack slipped from his shoulders, spilling white across the dirt. Granger's eyes narrowed. Before Samuel could explain, the whip cracked. Once, twice, 10 times. Blood spattered the cotton. Josiah watched helplessly, his fists clenched so tight his nails cut his own skin. Samuel cried out, but Granger did not stop. He whipped until Samuel fell silent, his body limp in the dirt. When Josiah reached him, it was too late. Samuel's chest no longer rose. The overseer spat on the ground. "Weak stalk," he muttered, before walking away. Josiah carried his brother's body to the edge of the quarters. With his own hands, he dug a shallow grave in the cold earth. No preacher came, no hymn was sung, only the sound of Josiah's sobs muffled into the night. That night, something inside him changed. As he sat by the grave, staring at the sky, he whispered words he had never dared to say aloud. "This Christmas, it ends." From that moment, Josiah's silence was no longer submission, it was strategy. He worked as before, his face calm, his pace steady. But behind his eyes, plans formed. He studied the house not with the gaze of a servant, but with the mind of an enemy. He noted where the garlands hung, where the whiskey was stored, where the overseer kept his whip. Each night, he sat by the fire in the quarters, staring into the flames. The others thought he mourned his brother. He did. But he also saw in those flames the shape of vengeance. Josiah was not reckless. He did not speak his full plan aloud. But to a few trusted souls, he whispered, "The house will burn. This Christmas. While they feast, while they drink, it will burn." Gasps filled the dark. Some begged him to stay silent, fearing the lash, the noose, the chains. Others, eyes wet with anger, nodded silently. But Josiah knew, even if no one followed him, even if he alone stood against the fire, he would see it done. Because Samuel's grave was still fresh, and Josiah's heart was already burning. The days after Samuel's death stretched long and heavy. The quarters were quieter, as if grief itself had settled over them like a suffocating fog. Mothers hushed their children more quickly, men bowed their heads lower, women prayed with trembling voices. The overseer's shadow loomed over everything, and the memory of Samuel's broken body haunted every step. But Josiah's silence was different now. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of sharpened steel. Thomas Granger seemed to revel in the fear he created. After Samuel's death, his cruelty only grew. Perhaps he sensed no one dared resist him. Perhaps he simply enjoyed watching life drain from the enslaved. Every morning, his boots thundered across the fields. His whip cracked before dawn and long after dusk, the sound echoing through the cotton rows like a snake's hiss. He would ride his horse between the lines of workers, striking not out of necessity, but out of sport. A stumble earned a lash. A glance earned a shove. A muttered prayer earned the butt of his rifle across a man's jaw. And every time he laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down spines. But Josiah no longer lowered his gaze. He watched Granger with steady eyes, memorizing his patterns, the way he rode, the moments he drank from his flask, the routes he walked at night. Each detail stored, each weakness marked. Inside the house, Mistress Eleanor prepared for the grand Christmas Eve feast. She wanted garlands draped across every door, candles in every window, silver polished until it gleamed like mirrors. She barked orders from dawn till dusk, her sharp voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Clean the floors until I can see my reflection," she snapped. "Polish the railings. Sweep the chimneys." The slaves worked harder than ever. Their fingers cracked from scrubbing, their backs bent under buckets, their bodies ached from hauling firewood. And all the while, Eleanor's eyes searched for the slightest imperfection, her cane ready to strike when she found one. To the Bellamys, Christmas was joy. To the slaves, it was torment disguised as festivity. Josiah moved through it all with quiet focus. Every candle Eleanor demanded, every barrel of whiskey Charles ordered, every pine branch hung for decoration, he saw not as ornaments, but as fuel. Fuel for fire. At night, in the dim glow of the quarters, whispers stirred. Some spoke of the feast to come, of the scraps they might be allowed, the one night they might taste meat. Others whispered about Samuel, their voices hushed, fearful that even his memory might draw punishment. But Josiah whispered of something else. To a handful of trusted men, Jacob, old and scarred from years of lashes; Dinah, who bore the overseer's cruelty more than any woman should ever bear; and little Eli, no older than 16, Josiah spoke softly. "The house will burn," he said, voice low but steady. "On Christmas Eve, while they drink and laugh, it will burn." Their eyes widened. Fear flickered. "Josiah," Jacob whispered, "they'll kill us all." "They already are," Josiah replied. His eyes glinted in the firelight. "Slowly. Day by day. Samuel is proof. Better we die in fire than live in chains." The words hung heavy. No one argued. No one agreed. But the silence was not rejection. It was the silence of men and women whose hearts had been stirred, even if their tongues dared not confess it. 3 nights before Christmas, the tension snapped. It was late evening when Overseer Granger stormed into the quarters. His boots struck the dirt floor, his whip dangling at his side, his eyes searching. And when they landed on Dinah, a young woman barely 20, his lips curled into a cruel grin. "You!" he barked, pointing. Her body stiffened, her eyes wide. But she dared not resist. Slowly, trembling, she followed him out into the night. The quarters fell silent. Everyone knew what it meant. No one moved. No one spoke. They listened as the barn door slammed shut, as her muffled cries cut through the darkness. Josiah sat on his cot, fists clenched, jaw tight, every muscle straining not to rush forward. He knew the risk. He knew the cost. Yet each cry from the barn tore deeper into his chest, fanning his fury into a blazing storm. When Dinah returned hours later, her dress torn, her body bruised, her eyes hollow, Josiah's heart hardened to stone. That night, as she lay weeping, Josiah stared at the flames of the hearth and whispered, "This Christmas, Granger dies." In the days that followed, Josiah moved with quiet precision. From the workshop, he took rags and soaked them with lamp oil. From the kitchen, he pocketed bits of turpentine. From the woodpile, he gathered small splinters, perfect for kindling. He hid them carefully, beneath loose floorboards in the quarters, inside hollow logs near the barn, behind barrels in the shed. Each item, each hidden scrap, was a piece of a larger design. The house itself was ready fuel. Dry wood beams, pine garlands, candles in every window, barrels of whiskey stacked in the cellar. The feast would be crowded, loud, drunken, perfect cover for the fire to spread. And the overseer? He would be drunk. Josiah had seen him every Christmas, stumbling, laughing, his whip dangling forgotten at his side. This year, that whip would become his chain. Word spread quietly among the enslaved. Not through shouts, not through open talk, but through glances, through nods, through the trembling of hands that passed food at night. Some were terrified. They begged Josiah to abandon his madness. "They'll slaughter us all," one woman whispered. "They'll burn us alive," said another. But others felt a spark ignite in their hearts. For years, they had dreamed of vengeance, but dared not speak it. Now Josiah gave voice to what they buried deep. A boy whispered, "Will you really do it?" Josiah's eyes locked with his. "Yes, this Christmas." Fear battled with hope in every heart. And though no one openly joined him, no one betrayed him either. The silence of the quarters became a shield around his plan. Meanwhile, Master Charles Bellamy was blind to the storm brewing beneath his own roof. He bragged to his neighbors that this year's feast would outshine them all. He ordered more wine, more meats, more musicians. He walked proudly through his halls, admiring the candles, boasting of his wealth, never once imagining that the very flames that lit his house would soon consume it. Mistress Eleanor fretted over the smallest details, snapping at slaves for crooked garlands, striking them for dust on the banisters. She demanded perfection, never realizing that the perfection she sought would serve as kindling. The Bellamys prepared for Christmas with joy. Josiah prepared for Christmas with vengeance. The days slipped by, each one tighter with tension, each night heavier with silence. Josiah's eyes never left Granger. Every laugh, every cruel shove, every lash of the whip only fed the fire inside him. And when the overseer staggered drunk through the yard one evening, roaring with laughter, Josiah knew. The time was almost here. The slaves whispered prayers at night, their voices trembling. Some prayed for deliverance. Others prayed for Josiah's strength, and Josiah prayed only for one thing: fire. The embers of rebellion glowed brighter, waiting only for Christmas Eve to ignite. And when it came, the world of Bellamy Plantation would never be the same. Christmas Eve arrived with a deceptive calm. The winter sky was clear, the moon sharp above the bayou, and frost glittered faintly on the fields. From the great house, laughter spilled into the night, carried on music and wine. For the Bellamys, it was the highlight of the year, the grand feast, the display of wealth, the gathering of neighbors. For the slaves, it was another night of servitude, their bodies moving like shadows through glowing halls. But for Josiah, this night was different. The Bellamy house shone like a lantern in the dark. Pine garlands lined the staircases, candles flickered in every window, and tables groaned under the weight of roasted turkeys, glazed hams, and pies. Wine flowed freely, fiddlers played. Guests danced, their silk gowns twirling, their boots striking the polished floors. Master Charles Bellamy boasted loudly to his neighbors, "Not a feast in the parish can match this. Tonight, we dine like kings." Mistress Eleanor beamed, jewels glittering at her throat. The overseer, Granger, already half drunk, leaned against the doorframe, whip at his belt, flask in hand, laughing with a harsh bark that cut through the music. And moving quietly among them was Josiah. He carried trays of wine, platters of roasted meat, pitchers of cider. His face was calm, unreadable, his eyes lowered. But beneath his calm exterior, his heart pounded like a drum. Every candle flame, every overturned cup of whiskey, every dry garland, it all shimmered before him as potential fire. The time was near. Midnight approached. Guests were flushed with drink, their laughter louder, their movements slower. The music grew frantic, fiddles screeching as couples spun wildly. Wine spilled across the floor. Pine needles dropped from garlands, dry and brittle. The slaves, exhausted, were finally dismissed to the quarters, except for a few chosen to remain and clean. Josiah was among them. He thanked fate silently. This was the moment he had waited for. When Mistress Eleanor ordered him to clear the pantry, Josiah obeyed. He slipped inside, closing the door behind him. In the dim glow of the lantern, his hand reached beneath his coat. From the cloth tucked inside, he drew oil-soaked rags. His breath came slow, steady. His hands did not tremble. He placed the rags in the corners, beneath shelves stacked with flour sacks, beside barrels that reeked of whiskey. Then, with practiced ease, he struck flint against steel. Sparks leapt, caught, and kissed the oil. A faint glow blossomed into flame. The fire whispered at first, licking the wood, curling upward in delicate fingers. But within moments, it spread hungrily, growing, stretching, consuming. Josiah stepped back, watching as the flames deepened, their light reflecting in his eyes. There was no turning back now. The smell of smoke began to drift into the hall. Guests laughed, oblivious. But Granger, stumbling through the corridor with his flask, sniffed the air. His eyes narrowed. "Fire," he muttered. He staggered toward the pantry, pushing the door open. Flames leapt toward him, roaring now, smoke billowing. He cursed, stumbling back, shouting, "Fire! Fire in the house!" Chaos erupted, guests screamed, wine glasses shattered, chairs overturned. Master Bellamy shouted orders, his voice drowned by the roar of flames. Mistress Eleanor shrieked, clutching her jewels. Musicians dropped their instruments, scrambling for the doors. But Granger had no time to rally. Josiah was already upon him. With the strength of years of rage, Josiah seized the overseer by the throat, dragging him through the smoke-filled hall and out into the yard. Granger fought, fists swinging, curses spilling from his mouth. But Josiah's grip was iron. The night outside was cold, the stars sharp above. Behind them, the Bellamy house roared in fire, flames clawing skyward, sparks showering down. Josiah slammed Granger against the great oak tree, the very tree where Samuel had once been whipped. He tore the overseer's own whip from his belt and looped it around a branch. Granger's eyes widened in sudden terror. "You'll hang for this, boy," he spat. Josiah's voice was low, steady. "No, you will." With one final heave, he pulled the whip tight, forcing the overseer upward. Granger's boots kicked wildly, his curses turned to choked gasps, his body twisting in the firelight. Within moments, his struggle slowed, then ceased. The overseer hung lifeless, his body silhouetted against the burning house. Behind Josiah, the Bellamy mansion was consumed. Flames roared from the windows, beams cracked, glass shattered. The garlands turned to ash, the chandeliers crashed to the ground. Barrels of whiskey exploded in thunderous bursts, sending guests fleeing into the yard, their silks and finery coated in soot and ash. The slaves gathered at the edge of the fields, watching with wide eyes. Some wept in fear, certain death would come for them all. Others stared in, unable to believe what they were seeing, the master's house, the overseer's body, vengeance made flesh. For a moment, time seemed to hold still. The master shouted orders. The mistress wailed. Neighbors cursed and stumbled in panic. And Josiah stood beneath the oak, chest heaving, watching fire and death intertwine. He had done it after years of silence, years of suffering, years of watching Samuel's grave rot in the cold earth. He had struck back. The night was no longer theirs. It was his. But vengeance is never clean. Inside the house, some slaves had been trapped. A young boy, too slow to escape, cried out from an upstairs window before the flame swallowed him. A woman collapsed in the smoke, her body never found. Their cries mingled with those of the master's guests, all equal in the fire's hunger. Josiah felt each death like a knife, but he did not falter. For he knew slavery itself had already claimed far more lives than the fire ever would. The night roared on, the flames devouring all. And as Josiah stood before the inferno, the overseer's corpse swinging gently in the cold wind, he whispered to Samuel's grave across the fields, "This is for you, brother." The Bellamy mansion was no longer a house, it was a furnace. Flames licked the sky, sparks flew like meteors, and smoke curled upward in black columns that could be seen for miles across the Louisiana night. The Christmas feast had turned into a nightmare. The joyous sound of fiddles and laughter had been replaced by screams, shouts, and the roaring voice of fire. And at the heart of it stood Josiah, chest heaving, his face lit by the inferno. Master Charles Bellamy staggered into the yard, his fine coat singed, his powdered wig askew. He barked orders that no one obeyed. Water. Buckets. Save the house. But the flames had already claimed it. Beams cracked and fell, windows burst outward, fire poured down the grand staircase like molten gold. It was too late. Mistress Eleanor stumbled beside him, her gown trailing ash. She clutched a silver candlestick, as if the weight of it could protect her from the firestorm. "My jewels, my dresses," she shrieked. "Charles, we must save them." Her husband turned on her, his face twisted. "Damn the jewels. The house is gone." The guests, once so merry, now fled into the night like hunted animals. Some screamed prayers, others cursed Josiah's name. And there, swinging from the oak, was Overseer Granger, his boots no longer kicked. His body turned slowly in the cold wind, silhouetted against the raging house. His whip hung loose at his side, the same whip that had cracked against countless backs. Slaves who had suffered beneath him stared at his body in awe. For years, Granger had been the terror of the quarters. Now he was nothing but a corpse in the firelight. Some smiled through tears. Others crossed themselves, half believing they'd see the devil himself come to drag him down. Josiah stood before the body, unflinching. "The whip breaks tonight," he muttered, voice low and steady. Horses reared in panic, tearing free from their reins, their screams piercing the night. Chickens scattered, pigs squealed, dogs barked wildly. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning wood, pine, and flesh. Slaves poured from their cabins, drawn by the blaze. Children clung to their mothers. Old men fell to their knees, whispering prayers. Some thought this was the end of days, that the fire was the judgment of God himself. But others, seeing Josiah standing strong with flames behind him and the overseer hanged above him, saw something else. They saw rebellion. "Josiah done it," one whispered. "He struck the master," said another. And murmurs spread like sparks. Freedom, vengeance, justice. Master Charles spotted Josiah across the yard, his face twisted with fury and fear. "You!" he roared, his voice breaking. "You did this!" Josiah did not move. He simply stood there, the fire behind him painting him in hell's own light. His silence was answer enough. Bellamy reached for a pistol at his belt. His hand shook with rage as he leveled it at Josiah. You'll pay for this, boy. You'll hang in chains till your bones turn to dust." But before he could fire, a group of slaves rushed forward. They tackled him, the pistol flying from his hand, clattering across the dirt. Mistress Eleanor shrieked, clawing at them with her nails, but they shoved her back. The power had shifted. For the first time, the master was on the ground, helpless in the dirt of his own yard. Behind them, the mansion reached its breaking point. With a deafening crack, the roof caved in, sending a storm of sparks into the sky. The sound was like thunder, shaking the ground. Flames burst outward, consuming the last of the great hall. The guests still trapped inside screamed once, then fell silent as the fire claimed them. The slaves watched in horrified awe. The symbol of their oppression, the house where they had been whipped, ordered, sold, and broken, was collapsing into ash before their eyes. And Josiah, watching it fall, felt both triumph and sorrow. Triumph because vengeance was real, burning, and undeniable. Sorrow because fire does not choose its victims. Mistress Eleanor crawled across the dirt, her hair wild, her gown torn. She glared at Josiah with a hatred so pure it cut through the smoke. "You demon," she spat. "You'll be buried alive for this. Every one of you will be slaughtered. The militia will come, and they'll make you wish you'd never been born." Her voice cracked, high and shrill. She clawed at the earth as if trying to dig herself into it, away from the fire and the fear. Josiah looked at her, not with pity, not with rage, but with the cold calm of a man who had already accepted his fate. "You buried us alive long ago," he said quietly. As the fire consumed the last of the mansion, Josiah faced his choice. He could flee into the swamps, vanish into the night with those willing to run. Or he could stay, face the wrath that was surely coming, and die as a symbol. The slaves looked to him, eyes wide, waiting for his word. He was no longer just Josiah. He was their voice, their courage, their leader. He raised his hand. "Go," he said, "into the swamps. Tonight, you are free." Some obeyed instantly, gathering their children and vanishing into the darkness, their footsteps muffled in the wet earth. Others hesitated, torn between hope and fear. And a few stayed, unwilling to abandon him. The sound of hoofbeats broke the night. The Bellamy's neighbors, hearing the fire, had come armed. Muskets cracked, the smell of gunpowder mixing with the acrid smoke. Slaves screamed and scattered. Josiah stood tall, the overseer's whip still in his hand. He did not run. He faced the riders as they stormed into the yard, shouting curses, their guns flashing. One bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Another grazed his leg. Blood dripped into the dirt, warm and steady. But still he rose. The mansion collapsed entirely, a roar of fire swallowing the last of its walls. Sparks rained down like burning snow. The overseer's body swayed gently from the oak, creaking against the branch. And there, in the chaos, Josiah stood one final time. His clothes were torn, his body bleeding, but his eyes burned with the same fire that consumed the house. He raised his voice, strong and defiant, carrying above the screams and shots. "You can burn my body, you can chain my bones, but you will never break us again." The riders closed in. Muskets flared. The night split with thunder. Josiah fell, his blood soaking the earth beneath the oak. For a moment, there was only the crackle of the fire, the creak of the rope holding Granger's body, and the ragged breathing of those who had witnessed it all. The mansion was gone. The overseer was gone, and Josiah, leader, brother, avenger, lay still beneath the tree where his people had once been broken. But even in death, he had changed everything. The slaves who fled into the swamps carried his story. Those who stayed carried his memory. And the land itself bore the scars of his fire. Morning came to the Bellamy plantation like a curse. The mansion was gone, reduced to smoldering ash and collapsed beams. The smell of smoke hung thick over the land, clinging to every leaf, every garment, every breath. What had once been the pride of Charles Bellamy was now a blackened skeleton, its grand halls silent forever. But the land was not silent. Cries rose from the quarters. Chains clinked again. The vengeance of one night had brought a harsher dawn. By midday, the militia had arrived. Armed men on horseback swept across the fields, dragging out those who had not fled. They tied men to posts, whipped them until their backs were nothing but torn flesh. They shackled women, struck children, and demanded names. "Who lit the fire?" they shouted. "Who hanged Granger?" Some slaves sobbed. Others kept silent, lips pressed tight. A few whispered Josiah's name, but most held it like a sacred secret, protecting it even under the lash. Master Bellamy, though ruined, was not dead. His face was burned, his pride shattered, but his thirst for vengeance burned hotter than the fire that had claimed his home. He stood before the militia, voice hoarse with rage. "Find every last one who ran. Hang them. Burn them. Make them an example." Mistress Eleanor, hair singed, her gown in tatters, stood beside him whispering curses. Her voice was shrill, venomous. "Bury them alive. Let the worms eat their flesh." The overseer's body still swung from the oak, though by afternoon, the militia cut it down. They buried Granger with hurried hands, not out of respect, but to erase the shame. Still, whispers spread. The whip man had died by the same whip he once wielded. For days, the swamps echoed with the sound of dogs and gunfire. Fugitive slaves who had followed Josiah's command were hunted like animals. Some were dragged back in chains, their feet bleeding, their bodies starved. Others vanished into the cypress and moss, never to be seen again. Stories grew in the quarters, of a woman who made it all the way to New Orleans, of a child hidden by free blacks in the city, of men who melted into the bayou and lived like ghosts. But every capture brought terror. The militia hanged some at the gates of the plantation, their bodies swaying as a warning. Others were whipped to death in the yard. Christmas had ended, but its shadow lingered, bloody, merciless. Josiah did not live to see morning. His body, riddled with musket balls, was dragged by the militia to the very oak where he had killed Granger. There, they tied his corpse in chains and left it hanging as a warning. Days passed. His body blackened in the sun, flies swarmed, birds picked at his flesh. The masters said it was justice. The slaves said it was martyrdom. Children whispered, "Josiah walks at night, with fire in his hands." Mothers hushed them, but even they believed a piece of it. The chains clinked in the wind, and every sound was a reminder. One man had dared. The Bellamys rebuilt, but never to their former glory. The ashes of the old mansion remained, a scar on the land. The new house was smaller, meaner, its halls colder. The masters watched their slaves with suspicion now. Every whisper, every glance was cause for punishment. The overseers were harsher, the chains heavier, the night patrols constant. The fire had not freed the people, but it had unsettled the masters. And in the hearts of the enslaved, something had changed. They spoke of Josiah in hushed tones, around fires, in the fields, in the church when the preacher's voice lifted in hymns. They spoke of the night the master's house burned, the overseer swung, and the slaves stood unbroken in the fire's glow. Some wept when they remembered. Others smiled faintly. For even in death, Josiah had given them something their masters could never chain: belief. Years later, long after 1836, when the Civil War brought soldiers and rumors of freedom, old men and women still told the story. "Do you remember Josiah?" they asked. "The one who hanged the overseer. The one who burned the house on Christmas Eve." The story spread beyond the plantation, whispered from one set of chains to another. Some said Josiah was alive, living in the swamps, waiting for the right night to rise again. Others said he had become a spirit of fire, walking the earth to punish cruel masters. And when plantations burned mysteriously in later years, some slaves would smile quietly and murmur, "Josiah's hand did it." The Bellamys tried to erase him. They cursed his name, swore it never to be spoken. But the land remembered, the ashes remembered, the chains remembered. Josiah's rebellion did not end slavery. It did not break the system. But it left a mark no whip could erase. It reminded the enslaved that masters bled, that overseers could fall, that houses could burn. And perhaps most of all, it reminded them that on one cold Christmas Eve in 1836, a man who had been beaten, broken, and buried in silence chose to rise in fire. He did not wait for freedom to be handed to him. He seized it, if only for a night, and carved his vengeance into history. Chains may hold a body. Whips may tear the flesh. But once a fire of resistance is lit, it cannot be buried alive. And in the ashes of the Bellamy plantation, Josiah's fire still burns.